I'm Gloria, 28 female. I live in a quiet apartment downtown, surrounded by books and historical documents, which makes sense since I work as an archivist for the City Museum. It's a peaceful life, one I've carefully built for myself after years of navigating the quiet turbulence of my blended family. My grandmother was my anchor in that storm, and when she passed, she left me a piece of her legacy that I treasured more than anything. A promise that my own mother would shatter for the sake of my stepsister. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My grandmother, Margaret, was not a woman of extravagant tastes, but she appreciated things that were made to last. History, family, and loyalty were her cornerstones. She was my biological father's mother, and after he passed away when I was little, she became my staunchest ally. When my mother, Eleanor, remarried Richard and I gained a stepsister, Brooke, my grandmother was the one constant, a living link to the side of my family I barely knew. She lived in a modest but beautiful home filled with antiques, each with a story. I spent countless weekends there, listening to her tales of the past, absorbing the scent of old wood and lemon polish. The most enchanting of all her possessions was her engagement ring. It wasn't a massive, flashy diamond that you'd see on celebrities. It was an Art Deco piece from the 1920s, a 1-carat old European cut diamond set in platinum, with delicate filigree work and tiny sapphires flanking the center stone. It was timeless, elegant, and imbued with the history of her 60-year marriage to my grandfather. She would often let me try it on, its cool weight feeling significant on my finger. "One day, Gloria," she'd say, her voice soft but firm, "this will be yours. It belongs to our bloodline, a reminder of where you come from." That promise was everything to me. It wasn't about the monetary value, it was about the connection, the history. It was a physical piece of the grandmother I adored and the family I'd lost. When she passed away 2 years ago, I was devastated, but I found solace in knowing I would have this piece of her forever. The will reading was a formal affair. My cousin David, who had just passed the bar and was starting his career as a lawyer, sat with me. The will was clear and meticulously drafted. My grandmother had left her house and a significant portion of her savings to a historical preservation society, a move that irritated my mother to no end. Eleanor had always seen her mother-in-law's assets as a potential windfall. To my mother, she left a sum of money and a few pieces of antique furniture she'd always admired. To me, the will explicitly stated, "To my beloved granddaughter, Gloria, I bequeath my platinum and diamond engagement ring as a symbol of our family's enduring love and history. It is my express wish that this ring remains in her possession to be passed down through her future generations." The executor of the will, a longtime family friend, handed my mother the velvet box containing the ring. The will stipulated that because I was still in a small apartment and didn't have a proper safe, my mother was to hold it for me until I requested it or moved into a more permanent home. At the time, it seemed like a reasonable precaution. I trusted my mother. That was my first mistake. Eleanor held the box with a tight, polite smile. "Of course, I'll keep it safe for you, darling," she'd said, patting my hand. Her voice had that smooth, polished quality she used when she was closing a deal for her interior design business. It was a voice that could make you believe anything. Brooke, my stepsister, who was then just starting to get her high-end clothing boutique off the ground with a hefty investment from her father, Richard, had glanced at the box with a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't quite jealousy, but more like assessment. The way she'd look at a handbag, calculating its brand and value. Over the next 2 years, life went on. I settled deeper into my career, finding fulfillment in preserving the stories of others. My relationship with my mother and her new family remained cordial but distant. We had family dinners on major holidays, where Richard would talk about the stock market, Eleanor would critique the decor of whatever restaurant we were in, and Brooke would document the entire meal for her boutique's social media feed. I was an outlier in their world of aesthetics and commerce. They valued things that were new, expensive, and trendy. I valued things that were old, meaningful, and real. I rarely asked about the ring, mostly because I didn't want to give my mother the impression that I didn't trust her. Once, about a year after the funeral, I mentioned it. "Oh, it's tucked away in the safe, darling," Eleanor had said, waving her hand dismissively. "It's perfectly secure. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." The condescending tone should have been a red flag, but I let it go. I told myself she was just being her usual self, a woman who measured love in tangible, expensive gifts and couldn't quite understand a sentimentality that didn't come with a price tag. The illusion of security, however, was about to be shattered. It began with an announcement at Easter dinner. Brooke, beaming, flashed a massive, cushion-cut diamond ring on her finger. She was engaged to a man who was as obsessed with appearances as she was. The wedding planning began immediately, and it was clear from the outset that this was not going to be a modest affair. Eleanor was in her element, taking over as the de facto wedding planner. "It's going to be the event of the season," she declared, her eyes gleaming. "My daughter deserves nothing but the best." The way she said "my daughter" always had a subtle edge, a way of reminding me that I was hers, but Brooke was hers. The product of her perfect second marriage. The pressure was on, and as I would soon discover, my grandmother's legacy was about to become collateral damage in their quest for the perfect wedding. The wedding preparations escalated into a frenzy of opulent spending. My stepfather, Richard, a financial advisor who ironically preached fiscal restraint to his clients, seemed to have no such rules for his own family. He was utterly captivated by Eleanor and Brooke, and their happiness was his primary objective, no matter the cost. Discussions at family gatherings revolved around venues that cost more than my yearly salary, florists who imported rare orchids from another continent, and a guest list filled with the city's social elite. I felt like an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe. My quiet life of dusty archives and historical accuracy was a world away from their pursuit of fleeting glamour. The centerpiece of this entire spectacle was, of course, the wedding dress. Brooke, who owned a fashion boutique, saw her wedding as the ultimate marketing opportunity. Her dress had to be a statement, a breathtaking, one-of-a-kind creation from a renowned designer. She and my mother flew to New York for a week of consultations, a trip documented exhaustively on Brooke's Instagram. They visited exclusive ateliers, sipping champagne while looking at sketches. The designer they settled on was famous for his intricate lacework and couture price tags. A few weeks later, I was at my mother and Richard's house for a Sunday brunch. The mood was electric. Brooke was scrolling through photos on her phone, her face glowing. "We found it, Gloria," she announced, not looking up. "The one." Eleanor clasped her hands together, her smile radiant. "It's a masterpiece. It's going to be featured in a bridal magazine. The designer is even giving Brooke a professional discount because of her boutique's influence." I feigned interest, asking the requisite questions about the style and fabric. Then Richard cleared his throat. "Well, it's certainly a masterpiece of engineering, too. The price tag is something else." He said it with a laugh, but I caught a flicker of tension in his eyes. Eleanor shot him a look, a quick, sharp glance that silenced him immediately. "Richard, darling, you can't put a price on a perfect memory," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime moment for our daughter." The conversation moved on, but that brief exchange stuck with me. It was the first crack in the facade. Richard was the money man. If he was balking at the price, it must have been astronomical. Still, I assumed he would simply move some funds around or extend their line of credit. It was their money, their choice. It had nothing to do with me. The betrayal came subtly, wrapped in the guise of a casual conversation a month later. I had called my mother to ask about plans for her upcoming birthday. After we finalized the details, there was a strange pause on her end. "Gloria, honey," she began, her tone suddenly syrupy sweet, a tone that always put me on high alert. "You know how much Brooke's wedding means to all of us. We want everything to be perfect for her." "I know," I said cautiously. "You've mentioned it." Well, the final deposit for her dress was due, and things have been a bit tight. Richard had some investments that didn't pan out as expected, just a temporary cash flow issue. She sighed dramatically. I was in such a bind. I didn't know what to do. My stomach started to clench. I knew with a dreadful certainty where this was going. I stayed silent, forcing her to say it. I was looking through some of my old jewelry, she continued, her voice becoming airy and distant, seeing if there was anything I could part with, and I came across your grandmother's ring. It was just sitting there in the dark, not being appreciated. My breet. H caught in my throat. Mom, what did you do? Now, don't be dramatic, Gloria. It's an old ring. It's beautiful, of course, but its style is very dated. It's not something you would ever wear. Your tastes are so simple. She was talking faster now, the words tumbling out. I found a wonderful private collector who specializes in antique jewelry. He was absolutely enchanted by it. He gave me a very, very generous price for it, enough to cover Brooke's dress entirely, with some left over. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I couldn't form words. The line was silent except for the frantic beating of my own heart. You sold it? I finally whispered, the words feeling foreign and choked in my mouth. You sold Grandma's ring. I repurposed an underutilized asset, Gloria, she said, her voice suddenly crisp and businesslike, the gentle mother act vanishing. It was a practical solution to a pressing problem, and I was thinking of you, too. I've put aside a sum of money for you, a very generous amount. When you get married, you can buy yourself a brand new, modern ring. Something that's actually your style. You're not your grandmother. The sheer audacity of her statement left me speechless. She hadn't just sold a piece of jewelry. She had sold my history. She had sold my grandmother's final promise to me. She had taken a symbol of enduring love and liquidated it to pay for a piece of fabric that would be worn once. And she had done it without asking, without even telling me until after the fact, presenting it as if she had done me a favor. The will, I stammered, the will said it was for me. It was supposed to stay in the family. Oh, Gloria, wills are just formalities, she scoffed. Your grandmother was a sentimental old woman. She wouldn't have wanted to see the family struggle over a silly piece of jewelry when there was a real need. This is for Brooke's happiness. For the family's happiness, you should be happy for your sister. The call ended shortly after that. I don't remember what I said or if I said anything at all. I just remember hanging up the phone and feeling a cold, hollow emptiness spread through my chest. The trust I had placed in her, fragile as it was, had been completely pulverized. She hadn't just sold the ring. She had sold a piece of my soul, and she had done it with a smile, convinced it was just another smart business transaction. The price of a wedding gown, I thought with a terrifying clarity, was my entire history with the only person who had ever truly felt like family. For a full day, I was numb. I went to work, mechanically sorting through boxes of centuries-old correspondence, my mind a million miles away. The letters I was cataloging spoke of love, loss, and legacy, the very things my mother had just rendered meaningless with a single transaction. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandmother's hand, the ring sparkling on her finger as she tended her garden or kneaded dough in the kitchen. Then the image would shift to my mother's polished nails and satisfied smile, and a wave of nausea would wash over me. The numbness eventually gave way to a deep, gut-wrenching grief, followed by a simmering rage that grew hotter by the hour. My mother's justifications echoed in my head. It's not something you would ever wear. Wills are just formalities. You should be happy for your sister. Each phrase was a fresh stab, a deliberate twisting of the knife. She hadn't just misunderstood the ring's importance, she had willfully ignored it. She had erased my grandmother's explicit wish because it was inconvenient. I knew I couldn't let it go. This wasn't just about a piece of jewelry anymore. It was about the principle. It was about the deliberate disrespect to my grandmother's memory and the blatant disregard for me. My mother and Brooke lived in a world where everything was disposable and replaceable, where sentiment was a weakness and cash was king. I decided then and there that I wouldn't let them get away with it. But first, I needed to understand exactly what had happened. My mother's story was too smooth, too practiced. My first call was to my cousin David. I met him at a quiet coffee shop near his law firm, my hands trembling as I recounted the phone call with my mother. He listened patiently, his expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "Wow, Gloria, I'm so sorry." "Is there anything I can do, David?" I asked, my voice cracking. She was the custodian of the ring, not the owner. The will was specific. Can she legally do that? David steepled his fingers, his lawyer brain kicking into gear. "It's complicated," he began. "The legal term for her role is a bailee, someone who holds property in trust for another. Selling it is a major breach of that trust, and it's likely a form of conversion, which is the civil equivalent of theft. The problem will be proving it and getting the ring back. She'll claim she had why. Our best interests at heart, that she replaced it with its cash equivalent. A judge might see it as a family squabble and be reluctant to get involved." He leaned forward. "But your grandmother's will was ironclad. Her instructions were explicit. Eleanor didn't just violate a trust, she violated the terms of a legal document she agreed to uphold. The key is the wording. It is my express wish that this ring remains in her possession." That's not just a suggestion, it's a directive. He paused, thinking. "First things first, we need facts. Your mom said she sold it to a private collector. That's vague. We need to find out who, when, and for how much. Don't confront her again. Don't let her know you're looking into it. Let her think you've accepted it." That night, I went home with a renewed sense of purpose. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but now it was mixed with resolve. My job as an archivist had taught me one thing: every action leaves a paper trail. You just have to know how to find it. My mother was meticulous about her finances and her business. She was also incredibly proud of her negotiating skills. I had a strong suspicion that she wouldn't have sold a valuable antique to some random person she found online. She would have gone through a reputable dealer, someone who could give her a formal appraisal to ensure she was getting top dollar. My investigation started with her office. A few days later, I used the excuse of dropping off a birthday gift to visit her at home. I knew Richard and Eleanor were going out for the evening, so I timed my arrival for just before they were due to leave. I gave my mother the present, a beautiful leather-bound book on landscape architecture I knew she'd love. She was pleased, and the tension from our last call seemed to have been forgotten, at least on her end. "Thank you, darling." "You're so thoughtful," she said, air-kissing my cheek. As they left, I remembered that I'd left my water bottle inside. It was a flimsy excuse, but she was too distracted by her dinner plans to question it. "Just lock up when you leave," she called out as she walked to the car. I had about 30 minutes. I went straight to her home office, a pristine, white-tan gold room that looked like a magazine spread. My heart pounded as I sat at her desk. I started with her laptop, but it was password protected. I moved on to the physical files. She had a filing cabinet, neatly organized. I pulled open the drawer labeled Financials. It was filled with bank statements, investment reports, and receipts. I methodically worked my way through the files from the last 2 months, and then I found it. Tucked into a folder labeled Miscellaneous Assets was a formal document from a high-end estate jeweler in the city's most expensive district. It was a consignment agreement and a receipt of sale. My mother hadn't sold the ring to a mysterious, private collector. She had consigned it to one of the most prestigious jewelers in the state. The documents told the whole story. There was a detailed appraisal, listing the ring's specifications, the carat weight, the clarity of the diamond, the platinum setting, the antique cut, the provenance. The appraised value was significantly higher than I ever would have guessed, and next to it was the sale receipt. My mother had sold it for a staggering amount of money. The date of the sale was just 3 days after Brooke had chosen her dress. The lie was so blatant, so calculated. The story of a private collector was a fabrication designed to make the transaction untraceable. But there was another document in the folder that made my blood run cold. It was a bank statement showing a wire transfer from the jeweler into my mother's personal savings account. And on the very next line was a transfer of a slightly smaller, but still enormous, sum of money out of that account. The memo line read, "Deposit Veragio Couture Bridal." She hadn't just sold the ring for the dress. She had used the exact funds, a direct and dirty transfer from my grandmother's legacy to Brooke's vanity. It was all there in black and white. A secret sale, a crushing lie, and a paper trail that led directly from my stolen inheritance to my stepsister's wedding. The empty velvet box wasn't just a metaphor anymore, it was a crime scene. Armed with copies of the appraisal, the sales receipt, and the bank statement, I felt a shift inside me. The archivist's methodical patience was now fused with a cold, clear anger. My mother hadn't just been careless or desperate, she had been clinical. She had professionally appraised a family heirloom, sold it for maximum profit, and then funneled the money directly into her favored daughter's wedding. The story she fed me about a private collector and a generous sum set aside for me was a carefully constructed fiction meant to placate me and cover her tracks. She had underestimated me. She saw me as the quiet, sentimental Aya who lived in the past. She never imagined I would have the nerve to dig through the present. I met with David again, laying the documents out on his conference room table. He examined them carefully, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. "This is a slam dunk, Gloria," he said, tapping the sales receipt. "This proves everything. The appraisal establishes the ring's significant value. The receipt proves she sold it. And the bank statement is the smoking gun that links the sale directly to the dress. Her story about a private collector is a demonstrable lie, which shows intent to deceive." "So what now?" I asked, my voice steady. "Do we confront her? Do I sue her?" David leaned back in his chair. "We could send a legal letter demanding the return of the ring's value. She'd probably fight it, claim she was acting in your best interest, and it would get dragged through the courts. It would be messy, expensive, and it would tear the family apart." He paused, looking at me intently. "But you don't just want the money back, do you? You want justice. You want her and Brooke to understand what they did." He was right. A quiet settlement wouldn't be enough. I wanted them to face the consequences of their actions, to feel the weight of their choices. I wanted the truth to be exposed, not buried in legal paperwork. My mother and Brooke thrived on image, on the perception of their perfect, successful lives. A public scandal would be far more damaging to them than a private lawsuit. "There might be another way," David said, his eyes lighting up with a strategic glint. "You said your grandmother's will was meticulous. I want to see a full copy of it. Not just the excerpt about the ring, the whole thing. Sometimes wills have specific clauses, penalty clauses, that testators include to ensure their wishes are followed. Let's see if your grandmother had the foresight to protect her legacy." I got a copy of the full will from the executor's office the next day. I read through it, page after page of legal jargon, but nothing immediately jumped out at me. I brought it to David, and we spent an evening poring over the document together. And then, buried deep in a section about the duties of the executor and trustees, David found it. He let out a triumphant laugh. "Your grandmother was a genius. A stone-cold genius." He pointed to a paragraph titled "The In Terrorem Clause," also known as a no-contest clause. It was a standard feature in many wills designed to discourage beneficiaries from challenging the will. But my grandmother's had a unique twist. It stated that if any beneficiary were to directly or indirectly act in a manner that contravenes the express wishes laid out in this testament, or attempts to divert assets from their intended recipient, that beneficiary would not only forfeit their own inheritance, but would also be required to pay back the full market value of any previously received assets to the estate. My mother, Elinor, had been a beneficiary. She had received a cash inheritance and several valuable pieces of antique furniture. By selling the ring, an asset explicitly bequeathed to me with the directive that it remain in my possession, she had directly contravened my grandmother's express wishes. She had triggered the clause. "According to this," David explained, his voice filled with admiration, "she has forfeited her own inheritance. The money she received, the furniture, it all technically belongs back in the estate now. And since you are the wronged party, the estate would likely distribute those assets to you. She didn't just sell your ring, she gambled with her own inheritance and lost." The beauty of it was staggering. My grandmother, a woman who valued history and integrity, had left behind a legal tripwire for anyone who disrespected her final wishes. She had armed me from beyond the grave. The pieces of the plan started falling into place. A legal letter was still necessary, but its timing and delivery would be everything. Brooke's wedding was in 6 weeks. It was the event my mother and stepsister had sacrificed my grandmother's legacy for. It was their pinnacle of social achievement, built on a foundation of deceit. It seemed only fitting that the truth should be revealed in that context. We wouldn't just be asking for the value of the ring, we would be enforcing the will in its entirety. The next step was to confirm the current whereabouts of the ring. I couldn't bear the thought of it being lost forever. I called the estate jeweler, posing as a prospective client interested in Art Deco rings. I described my grandmother's ring in perfect detail, using the information from the appraisal. The woman on the phone was helpful. "Oh, that sounds like a stunning piece we had recently," she said. "A 1920s platinum filigree ring with sapphires? Yes, I remember it. It was sold to a collector in Europe just last month. It's already been shipped overseas." The news was a blow. The ring was gone, likely for good. For a moment, the grief resurfaced, sharp and painful. But then, it hardened back into resolve. I couldn't get the ring back, but I could make damn sure that my mother and Brooke paid for its loss. They had cashed in on my history. Now, I was going to cash in on theirs. I spent the next few weeks gathering the necessary documentation, getting the furniture my mother had inherited from the will formally appraised, calculating interest on the cash inheritance she had received and spent long ago. Every receipt I found, every number I crunched, felt like I was reclaiming a piece of what they had taken from me. The truth wasn't just hidden in legal documents anymore. It was out in the open, waiting for the perfect moment to be revealed. The 6 weeks leading up to Brooke's wedding were an exercise in self-control. I had to play the part of the dutiful daughter and stepsister, all while knowing the bombshell I was about to drop. I attended Brooke's bridal shower, bringing a thoughtfully chosen gift and smiling through her breathless descriptions of the final dress fitting. She paraded around the room, basking in the attention, completely oblivious to the fact that the very gown she was so proud of was a symbol of theft and deceit. At one point, she pulled me aside. "Gloria, I know we're not super close, but it means a lot that you're here," she said, her voice dripping with condescending sincerity. "I know Mom told you about the ring, and I just want you to know how much we appreciate your understanding. It really saved the day." I just smiled. "Of course, Brooke, anything for family." The words felt like ash in my mouth. My mother watched the exchange from across the room, a smug, satisfied look on her face. She truly believed she had gotten away with it. She thought my silence was acceptance, my presence was forgiveness. They had no idea that my quiet understanding was the calm before a Category 5 hurricane. Behind the scenes, David and I were meticulously preparing our attack. It wasn't just a legal strategy, it was a piece of theater. The goal was maximum impact with minimum collateral damage to anyone who wasn't directly involved. David drafted a formal legal notice. It was a masterpiece of cold, hard facts. It detailed Aliner's role as bailey of the ring, the specific clause in the will bequeathing it to me, and the explicit directive that it remain in my possession. It then laid out the evidence of the sale, the consignment agreement, the appraisal value, and the bank statement showing the funds being used for the wedding dress. The final section was the knockout punch. It cited the in terrorem clause and formally stated that by her actions, Aliner had forfeited her entire inheritance from my grandmother's estate. It included a detailed list of what she now owed the estate, the full cash value of her initial inheritance, adjusted for inflation, plus the current market value of the antique furniture she had taken possession of. The total sum was astronomical. It was more than the value of the ring. It was a devastating financial blow. The plan was to deliver this notice not at the wedding itself. That would be too chaotic and would punish innocent guests, but at the rehearsal dinner. The dinner was being held the Friday night before the wedding at an exclusive restaurant. It was a more intimate affair, limited to the wedding party and close family. It was the perfect stage. David hired a professional process server to deliver the documents. We timed it down to the minute. The server would arrive precisely at 8:00 p.m., just after the main course was served and right before the toasts were scheduled to begin. Richard, as the father of the bride, would undoubtedly be giving the first toast. This timing would ensure that everyone was seated, attentive, and that the family's carefully curated image of perfect harmony was at its peak. As the day approached, I felt a strange sense of calm. The rage had cooled and sharpened into a diamond-hard point of certainty. I was not acting out of spite. I was acting as the executor of my grandmother's will, the one person willing to enforce her final wishes. I was protecting her legacy. The night of the rehearsal dinner, I dressed carefully in a simple, elegant dark blue dress. I looked poised and understated, the exact opposite of the drama that was about to unfold. The restaurant was beautiful, all soft lighting and hushed tones. Richard, Eleanor, and Brooke were glowing, the perfect picture of a happy, affluent family. My mother greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. "Gloria, you look lovely," she said, "but so simple, as always." She gestured to Brooke, who was wearing a white designer cocktail dress that probably cost more than my rent. "Isn't she a vision?" I smiled and took my seat. I made small talk with relatives, sipped my water, and watched the clock. The dinner was everything I expected: lavish food, expensive wine, and conversations that skimmed the surface of things. Richard stood up to make his toast, his chest puffed out with pride. He spoke about how thrilled he was to welcome his new son-in-law into the family and how proud he was of his beautiful daughter, Brooke. As he was winding down, I saw a discreetly dressed man enter the restaurant and speak quietly to the maitre d'. The maitre d' nodded and pointed toward our table. The man, the process server, walked calmly and professionally to our table. He stopped behind Eleanor. "Excuse me, are you Eleanor Montgomery?" he asked quietly but clearly. Eleanor turned, her smile faltering with annoyance at the interruption. "Yes, I am. We're in the middle of a private event." "I have a legal document for you, ma'am," he said, placing a thick manila envelope on the table directly in front of her. He then turned and walked out of the restaurant as discreetly as he had entered. The entire interaction took less than 30 seconds, but the effect was immediate. A confused silence fell over the table. All eyes were on the envelope. "What on earth was that?" Richard asked, lowering his champagne glass. "Probably just some business nonsense," Eleanor said, trying to wave it away, though a flicker of unease crossed her face. She picked up the envelope, her brow furrowed. How unprofessional. She tore it open, her expression shifting from annoyance to confusion, and then, as she read the first page, to utter, blood-draining horror. The color drained from Eleanor's face as her eyes scanned the first page of the legal notice. Her perfectly composed expression, the one she wore like a shield, crumbled into a mask of disbelief. She flipped to the next page, and a small, choked sound escaped her lips. The attached documents, the appraisal, the receipt, the bank statement were undeniable proof. Her hand began to tremble, rattling the pages. Richard, seeing her distress, put his hand on her arm. "Eleanor, what is it? What's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. The entire table was now silent, watching them. The celebratory atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable tension. Eleanor didn't answer him. Her eyes darted around the table and finally landed on me. The look she gave me was no longer one of smug superiority. It was a look of pure, unadulterated fury and betrayal. "You," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "This is you. This is your doing." All heads turned to me. I met my mother's gaze calmly, my expression neutral. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The documents spoke for themselves. Brooke snatched the papers from her mother's hand. "What is this? What is she talking about?" She started reading, her perfectly made-up face contorting as she processed the information. Her eyes widened at the mention of the ring, the jeweler, and the exact amount that had been transferred to pay for her dress. "Mom, what is this?" she whispered, looking at Eleanor with a dawning horror. It was one thing to know the money came from a family heirloom. It was another to see the cold, hard proof that it was stolen goods. Richard finally took the documents. As a financial advisor, he understood the implications instantly. He read through the final section detailing the in terrorem clause and the staggering sum Eleanor now owed to the estate. His face went pale. He sank back into his chair as if the wind had been knocked out of him. The toast he had just given, full of pride and joy, now seemed like a bitter joke. "This can't be right," he muttered, shaking his head. "Eleanor, you told me Gloria was fine with it. You told me you two had an arrangement." "She did this to ruin my wedding?" Brooke shrieked, tears welling in her eyes and threatening to smudge her mascara. She threw the papers onto the table and pointed a shaking finger at me. "You're a jealous, bitter old maid. You couldn't stand to see me happy, so you cooked up this scheme to destroy my perfect day." Her outburst shattered the remaining silence in the restaurant. Diners at other tables were starting to stare. I finally spoke, my voice quiet but carrying in the tense air. "This has nothing to do with jealousy, Brooke. This has to do with a legally binding will. It has to do with my grandmother's final wishes." I turned my gaze to my mother. "Grandma entrusted you with something precious, not just an object, but a piece of our family's history, and you sold it to buy a dress. You lied to me about it, and you lied to your own husband about it." I looked at Richard. "She told you I was okay with it. Did she also tell you she sold it through a high-end jeweler after getting it appraised, or did she stick with the private collector story? Did she tell you that by selling it, she was violating a legal document and forfeiting her entire inheritance?" Richard stared at his wife, his expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. "Eleanor." My mother found her voice, and it was filled wit. "Vitriol, how dare you?" she snarled at me. "After everything I've done for you, I raised you. That ring was sitting in a box, doing nothing. I made a practical decision for this family." "You made a decision for your family," I corrected her gently. "For Brooke, you broke the law and you desecrated the memory of the one person who was always there for me. Grandma knew. She must have known what you were capable of. That's why she put that clause in the will. It was her way of protecting her legacy from your greed." The argument devolved from there. Richard and Eleanor began a heated, whispered fight. Brooke was sobbing uncontrollably, her fiancé trying awkwardly to comfort her. The rehearsal dinner was in ruins. The wedding gift I had given them was the truth, and it was a gift they could never return. I had given them consequences. I stood up, placing my napkin neatly on the table. "My cousin David, whose contact information is on that notice, will be in touch with your lawyer to arrange the repayment of the assets to the estate. You have 30 days. With that, I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the smoldering wreckage of their perfect evening behind me. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I didn't feel triumphant or joyful. I just felt a profound sense of closure. The battle was over. Justice, in its own cold and calculated way, had finally been served. The aftermath of the rehearsal dinner was exactly as explosive as I had anticipated. Brooke's wedding went ahead the next day, but the joyous, picture-perfect event they had planned was overshadowed by a dark cloud. I didn't attend. I received a string of furious, text-based tirades from both my mother and Brooke, calling me every name under the sun. They accused me of being vindictive, cruel, and heartless. According to a mutual acquaintance who did attend the wedding, the mood was incredibly strained. The bride had clearly been crying, the mother of the bride looked like she was about to shatter, and the father of the bride spent most of the reception in a quiet, tense conversation with his financial planner on the phone. The flawless facade had been irrevocably cracked. Richard, faced with the undeniable legal and financial reality of the situation, did not fight us. He was a man of numbers, and the numbers were not in their favor. Fighting the claim would only rack up legal fees and drag their names through the mud, a prospect that terrified him far more than the financial loss itself. Their reputation was paramount. Within 2 weeks, David received a call from their lawyer. They would comply. The process of repayment was humbling for them. The cash inheritance my mother had received years ago had to be paid back with interest. The antique furniture she had proudly displayed in her home, pieces she had acquired from my grandmother's will, were professionally valued and sold at auction. I attended the auction, not to bid, but to watch. I saw the ornate grandfather clock and the beautiful mahogany dining set that my grandmother had cherished being sold off to strangers. It was a somber moment, but it felt necessary. Those items were tainted by my mother's actions, and their liquidation was the price of her betrayal. The total amount recouped for the estate was substantial. After David's legal fees were paid, the remaining sum was legally mine, as the wronged beneficiary. It was more than enough to serve as a down payment on a small house, a permanent, secure home my grandmother had always wanted for me. In a strange, poetic twist, my mother's greed had inadvertently funded the very security for me that had been the pretext for her holding the ring in the first place. My relationship with my mother, Richard, and Brooke is, for all intents and purposes, over. I have not spoken to them since that night. The financial strain caused by the repayment, coupled with the revelation of Aliner's deceit, apparently created a massive rift between her and Richard. The last I heard, they were in marriage counseling, and the glamorous life they had built together was on shaky ground. Brooke's perfect marriage also started off on a sour note, colored by financial stress and family drama. Her boutique's social media, once a constant stream of lavish lifestyle posts, became noticeably more subdued. A few months ago, I used a portion of the money to purchase a new piece of jewelry. I went to a small, independent artisan who specialized in creating pieces with historical significance. I commissioned a locket. It's a simple, elegant piece made of platinum. Inside, on one side, is a tiny, lovingly restored photograph of my grandmother. On the other side, I had him inscribe the final line from her will, a symbol of our family's enduring love and history. It's not the ring. I will always mourn the loss of that tangible piece of my past. But this locket, a piece that I chose and created, has its own story now. It's a story of loss, but also one of strength. It's a reminder that legacy isn't just about the objects we pass down, but about the principles we uphold. My grandmother valued integrity, history, and loyalty. By fighting for her wishes, I was honoring her in a way that was more meaningful than simply wearing her ring. I now live in my own small house, with a garden out back where I'm trying to grow the same kind of roses my grandmother loved. My work at the archives continues to be a source of joy. I spend my days preserving the stories of others, and now I have my own story of a legacy defended and justice served. It was a cold, hard road, but in the end, I reclaimed not just what was rightfully mine, but also my own peace of mind. Some things are worth more than money, and some principles are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. My grandmother taught me that, and I will carry that lesson and her memory with me forever.